I'm a family constellation therapy facilitator. I essentially help people look at the unhealed, unacknowledged traumas of their families.
Kat Daou is a family constellation therapist helping clients heal generational trauma and restore harmony within their family systems.
Cycle breaker, at the end of the day, is somebody who internally feels that something is off in their world. The languages of the family are essentially the ways that families communicate with one another. It could be obvious things like you're expected to get A's, you're expected to marry this person. There's a lot of expectations. Well, the expectation becomes the language. At the end of the day, we are all looking for love, connection, belonging in our family system. And when we're not getting that, then we start to feel like the black sheep.
Can you explain what generational trauma is and how it manifests in people's lives today? Today, I'll be talking to a friend and colleague in the healing space, Kat Daou. Kat is a family constellation therapist. And if you don't know what family constellation therapy is, don't worry, you will know by the end of this episode. In today's episode, me and Kat will be talking about all things trauma, ancestral trauma, family trauma, past life trauma, and how that may be affecting you today. We'll talk about family systems and navigating toxic family traits. We will explore the dynamics and the concept of cycle breakers. And on top of all of that, we'll learn how Kat came into her psychic abilities and her connection to the spirit world. So let's dive in. So welcome, Kat. I'm really excited to have you here today to talk about all things family constellations therapy, and we'll see where the conversation goes. But I'm really excited about this because, as you know, I did a session with you about 6 months ago, and I found the work to be so different, so transformational, and I think more people need to understand what you do. So to start off, why don't you tell us what is family constellation therapy?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I know we've built quite a friendship since even before we did our FCT when we did the microdose training together too. So I feel like we have kind of this like bigger history together with everything. But yeah, it was a beautiful session that we had. And it definitely, as all FCTs or family constellation therapy sessions are, and I'll probably refer to FCT as FCT because it's a mouthful. But yeah, essentially, I'm a family constellation therapy facilitator, which means that I essentially help people look at the unhealed, unacknowledged traumas of their families, emotionally, physically, energetic, and how they have created a pattern and they move through each generation. And it usually shows up unconsciously for the client. And the whole goal of family constellation therapy is one, to bring freedom and liberation and truth and authenticity and love back into the client, and that ripples out into the family system. But it is also to restore order in the family system as well, because trauma oftentimes creates a vibration or an energy of chaos that can be emotionally or physically within the body. And so we are looking to essentially I hate the word heal because I just think it's like overly used and it like gives this false sense of power that maybe I have or whatever. I use an energy field, but essentially we are like quote unquote healing that trauma in the lineage. We're healing the dynamics between the client and certain people, situations, things, energies, ideas, even chakras. And then by doing that, we're restoring order back in the family system so that people are in their rightful role. Because many times with family trauma, and this showed up often for me, is I'll be enmeshed in, let's say, war trauma in my family. So I'll be like in the same line as the war trauma, or I'll be behind the generation that I'm supposed to be in front of because I'm carrying their trauma. So it kind of shows up like that. I can dive into it more, but that's essentially what FCT is.
Interesting. And what do most people usually come to you for?
Oh, it could be like so many different things, honestly. I mean, a lot of people come to me for mother healing. Actually, my specialty is helping women heal their relationships to their mothers, their maternal lineage, the mother within that they're learning to cultivate as a result of the mother wound. And also I work with the divine mother. So I work a lot in a non-religious sense with Mother Mary, but also a lot of different female beings, archetypes, and energies that essentially help the maternal healing as well. So that's like the umbrella, but underneath that is fertility, spirit baby communication, which I work as an intuitive and a medium as well. So I'm able to facilitate communication between the client and anyone that wants to come through to talk about the larger purpose as to why mom and baby are connecting and why baby wants to come in. But I've done anything from money to weight, food, general, just like curiosity about what's stuck in the family system. Not everyone comes in with something. Business owners, parent-child dynamics. I mean, you name it, in any area of life, people come to me with an inkling that they feel blocked in a certain area of their life. I feel like I should be making more money, or I haven't gotten pregnant yet, or I feel like I keep dating the same kind of person and they remind me of their mom. It's really simple and basic most of the time. And then my job as a facilitator is to use my intuition and my education with FCT into basically looking at what the client's biggest issue in their life is that they feel they're bringing to the session, and then kind of pull gently at pieces of what the issue is. Is mom involved in this? Is dad involved in this? Is brother involved in this? Is great grandma involved in this? And where can the healing happen through all of that? So just kind of depends.
So for someone to come to you for a session, do they need to know like what their trauma is or what is blocked, or is that unrooted during the session?
That's the beauty of what FCT is that most of the time people will come and say, I feel like I just want to understand why I keep picking the same partner. Let's just use that as an example. So like, yes, we will start looking at the nuclear family as that's the portal into your ancestral lineage to understand what goes back. But most of the time, actually, people will have a very simple understanding of what happened in their family. But many times there's so much more that people don't know about. And that's the beauty of using FCT is we are looking at these people and these dynamics in a family system within an energy field. We call them morphogenic fields. And I believe that in that morphogenic field, we get to discover the truth. I look at it like God energy, source energy. I like those words. Some people don't use those and like those, but it is like an energy field, a consciousness field, and it holds the information of what's happened, what hasn't happened, what's been said, what hasn't been said, what's been done, what hasn't been done, in all senses, all emotions. And so when somebody stands on a piece of paper that represents their mom, they start to uncover what they didn't know before they stood on that paper. And that's when the processing happens after standing on a piece of paper. They're like, oh my God, my mom was depressed. No wonder she couldn't show up for me. Okay, great. Now we understand mom better. Next time they come to the session, maybe we can start to understand why as we keep going back in the lineage. But it is a process.
Right. Beautiful. So how did you find a niche modality like this? Because it's something that I never heard of until I met you.
It's so wild, the story, actually. So like I've struggled with anxiety, depression. I had an eating disorder on and off for 12 years. Like from the outside, I guess a little bit of my story to share is like on the outside, you would have looked at my life and my family and been like, they have everything. Like what problems could they have? But on the inside of the home, there were a lot of emotional things happening that were very confusing for me as a child. And I quickly became the parentified oldest daughter of 5 kids who just had this sadness inside of her that there was no peace or true love or connection happening within the home, but I couldn't put words to it. And I grieved that and started to isolate myself and developed depression, anxiety. I had a slew of health issues growing up that were very ancestral in nature, endometriosis being one of them. And I went through so much, honestly, in my 20s. I could literally just write a book about what I went through in my 20s. I was married for 8 months to a guy I was 11 months to a guy I was with for 8.5 years. Got divorced, got promoted at work, thought that I had it all together finally, and then realized I'm not in alignment with myself. I'm not in alignment with my soul. I have all of these things that look really cool on the outside, just like my childhood, but on the inside, I'm truly unfulfilled. And I felt a lot of guilt saying that, but it was the truth. And I had finally faced that truth for the first time in a really honest way. And I remember laying on my bed at 28, and it was like right after my 28th birthday. And I had like a COVID boyfriend that was like super not aligned for me. And I was like in this job, and like it looked really cool on the outside, celebrities, influencers, traveling, dinners, you name it. But at the end of the day, sitting on that bed, I said out loud, all of the pain that I've been through has to have a purpose. I just don't know what it is. I need to have that purpose. And I swear, I don't know your thoughts on guides or anyone of the listeners' beliefs on guides, but I really believe I have guides and angels and ancestors that help me. And I believe that that was my soul meeting my human going, okay, now we have permission to move forward with the soul plan. And so days later, I went to my cousin, who I'm still really close with, who I bond with the spiritual stuff. She says, I saw this new person, you should go see her. So anytime she recommends someone, I always love it. And anyways, I asked her, do you have a life coach? Because I'm feeling like this weird feeling where I'm homesick for something that I don't know what I'm homesick for. And it's coming up as depression, and it's coming up as anxiety, and it's coming up as this deep loneliness. And I don't know what I miss, but I know that I miss something. And I'll never forget, she's cleaning her kitchen and she goes, 1, I think you're divinely homesick. You miss the other side. And I think that's something you need to look into. And 2, she goes, I don't have a life coach, but I know someone who does something called Family Constellation Therapy. She said, I hate it. I don't like it. I only do readings with this woman. I don't like doing FCT with her, but that's what she actually focuses on. Yeah. And she said, don't Google it. Don't look into it. Just book it. And I was so desperate. I booked the 6 months of coaching with FCT before even knowing what it was. I was wow. I'll do anything.
Yeah.
And I booked the first one. I did the first one, and it was like the first or the second one. I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm meant to do with my life. And I can't tell you that there was logic behind it. I can't tell you that it was anything other this inner knowing within me that this is what I was made to do. And I left my fancy job working for my family. Actually, I worked for my family's winery, and I left about 1.5 years later with their permission and their guidance, honestly. And I've been doing this for almost 3.5 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think when you truly find your purpose, it doesn't take long to get into it. It was the same for acupuncture and Chinese medicine for me. I started doing it in, let's say, March, and by July, I was already signed up to go to acupuncture school. It's just when it hits, and when you know, you know.
Yep.
But I love your story because I feel like that's something so many women, people in general, but especially women can relate to. This idea of growing up in a perfect home, everything perfect on paper, perfect from the outside, but just feeling off internally, feeling like the emotions don't make sense. Things just don't make sense. And because of that, we often think that we don't have trauma because we weren't abused, right? We were treated well. We were fed, we were clothed, we had what we needed. But there's so much to be said for that, kind of hidden trauma underneath that sits with us for a lifetime. And as you said, generations of lifetime.
Well, it's interesting. I love Dr. Gabor Mate. I call him my unofficial, mentor, but he is the one that taught me, and really kind of more so than taught me, rather validated for me, that complex PTSD and complex trauma can be as impactful on someone's life, especially in childhood, than one big trauma that happens. And it's that kind of psychological, sometimes trauma that we have with things that show up in a very secret way in our lives that we don't realize. And on that, when you speak on mothers, I mean, I've been healing the mother wound for quite some time now. And I worked on my dad. My dad had the obvious trauma.
Right.
For 10 years. And I was like, yeah, I don't need to work on my mom. My mom's got stuff, but and what I didn't realize is that I was protecting her. I was protecting my relationship with my mom because deep down I knew that if I were to tell myself that something was wrong with me and my mom's relationship, I would feel like a parentless child. That was the fear going through my head. Mm-hmm. So I think that with the mother wound, the reason why I like working with women so much is because I identify deeply with that wound and that grief and how long it took for me to validate that actually our relationship wasn't perfect. Right. And there were things that I needed to look at, and also to learn to accept her and love her in her humanness, which is an ongoing practice for our parents, not just her, but my parents, all of our parents. And so I love that you touch on that because it is so, so true.
So coming back to Gabor Mate and that idea that even these small, impactful traumas, for lack of a better word, can impact us just as much as the big traumas. In Chinese medicine, we see it exactly the same way. The same channels that are impacted by big traumas, such as physical and sexual abuse, are impacted by early childhood experiences that we feel through energy. So it might not even be something big, but it's that feeling that we take on either through our genetics or through the energy in the room. And they end up in the same areas in our body. So I find that really interesting that all connects to your work also.
You know, I thought that, as getting into FCT, that every modality did things differently in the healing space. But at the end of the day, what I'm really noticing is that a lot of us are going through this kind of wave of, again, healers, teachers, like coaches. I need to find like a new word. But basically facilitators, I guess, of the healing space, where we're all kind of waking up to this idea that we are energetic and physical beings and that they play so deeply within each other. I've been having these conversations with a lot of other women in the healing space, and they're like, well, this is the way that I do things. And I go, hilarious. That's also the way I do things. And it's a completely different modality. And yet the goal is always the same, to reach this place where there is mind, body, spirit healing for everyone. And everyone takes to a certain modality differently. So it's kind of like we're all a buffet and people get to choose from us whatever they like.
There's no one right way to do anything.
Amazing. Yes. Yes.
So getting back to trauma, because I think this is a really important topic. Can you explain what generational trauma is and how it manifests in people's lives today?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's look at it in a backwards perspective. So instead of starting generational, we'll start from the individual. Okay. So let's just say someone goes through an individual trauma. That could be mirroring something that happened in the generation before them, and then in the generation before them. And that's why we say it's unhealed and unconscious trauma, because we use the individual as the portal to looking into the ancestor. Most people would think ancestral trauma, you look at what happened in the past. Sure, you can do it that way. That's not the way I was taught, and that's not the way I like to do it, because the client is coming to me saying, I'm the one that needs help. The ancestors either support, well, they usually support, and they do benefit from it in some way. So I like to go that way. So that's what generational trauma is. And so we're just looking at the themes rather. So another thing is I have this 3-day workshop called the Age Mapping Workshop. And essentially it helps you track like traumas that you know about, like back into the lineage. And it's this whole thing. But my biggest takeaway for people in that 3-day workshop is, don't always look in generational trauma for the same thing, THING, that happens, because oftentimes it won't be the same thing. You may not okay, here's an example for me. My dad, when he was 8 years old, the first bomb that started the civil war off in Lebanon landed on the sidewalk in front of their home. And my grandparents and my dad and his 3 siblings were having breakfast on the balcony, and the shrapnel came up into the balcony. And my uncle was in a coma at 12 years old for 48 hours. My dad's paralyzed on one side of his face and has shrapnel in his heart. And my aunt, who's since passed from breast cancer, she had some deformities in her hand and arthritis from the metal. So immediately that trauma, that is a huge trauma that affected their life, right? Well, when I went into my ancestral healing journey, I was looking at themes of loss, anxiety, fear of lacking control, like all these different things that happen within war trauma, but I wasn't going through a war. So don't look always at the same thing that happens. You're looking at the theme, the underlying belief that comes as a result of the trauma, or a vibration or an energy of something, like I said, as a result, because oftentimes this stuff is unconscious. And sometimes we will try to identify the trauma as, oh, well, if I got a miscarriage, maybe my grandma had a miscarriage, and a lot of times it's more that maybe grandma didn't have a miscarriage, but she lost her husband. She lost love. That's the theme that we're looking for. So hopefully that answers your question.
Right. Like a theme of loss.
A theme of loss, a theme of perfection, a theme of control, a theme of like whatever it is. There's like big ones, but I never, ever try to label people with this kind of stuff because every single human being and family is nuanced. So it shows up differently.
So when we're talking about trauma and we're talking about family systems, this sounds like a very epigenetic conversation, right? So what is epigenetics to you and how does that show up in the ancestral family system?
It's similar to the question you just asked me, but I'm going to take it into a more like maybe scientific level. The way that I've always learned and understood epigenetics, to make it super simple, Andrew Huberman does a great podcast episode that's very scientific with a geneticist who talks about epigenetics more detailed for anyone who wants to geek out about that. But essentially we have these gene expressions in our DNA that get expressed or not expressed, so on or off based on our environment or things that we experience or things that we go through. And so again, if grandma experienced a life-altering trauma that she never healed and addressed emotionally within herself, and there was a reaction or a certain kind of response that then became attached to that emotion, then that becomes more of like an epigenetic expression of how to deal with stress or anxiety or, emotional eating. Like these are all things that we become genetically predisposed to because it's been repeating for so long, or the impact of that trauma was so deep that it becomes almost like an identity or character trait of someone. So again, it's looking at like either long-term effects of something that's happened over and over again that no one's healed and looked at, that then becomes part of the language of the family, which we can get into that topic as well. Or one big thing that happens, and then again, it's like never healed, and then it becomes the story in the family system.
Right. What are some examples of the language or story of families?
The languages of the family system are really interesting. I learned from a woman named Susie Tucker, and she explains that the languages of the family are essentially the ways that families communicate with one another for certain things. So a language of the family could be something like addiction. Everybody finds belonging and connection through the language of addiction. Right. So it's just like these very nuanced languages are the ways that we either verbally, subconsciously, consciously, like different ways that we communicate that language. And it could be obvious things like you're expected to get A's, you're expected to be perfect, you're expected to marry this person. There's a lot of expectations. Well, the expectation becomes the language. Or it could be something more nuanced and less obvious. That's not maybe verbally said, but it's acted through the family system. Everybody acts this certain way, and then that becomes kind of a language of the family system, which brings me into something I should have mentioned earlier with FCT. But my favorite part of FCT, I could talk about it for days, is the topic of belonging. Because really at the end of the day, we are all looking for love, connection, and belonging in our family system. And when we're not getting that, then we start to feel like the black sheep. Let's just say everybody in the family drinks and we don't want to drink. Well, we may be tempted to continue to drink because we want to belong. That's the language of the family system. We want to belong in the family, but we know that it's not good for us. And our fear is that if we turn the other way and we stop drinking, that we won't belong anymore. So we're motivated by belonging just naturally as humans, subconsciously and primally to be a part of a community. Well, what are the ways that you're not owning yourself authentically to belong to a family system when you know that something may not be in your highest and best good? And to that, I say, maybe your language of connection with your family is not through an eating disorder or control or perfection anymore. Maybe the language of your family through belonging connection now is teach me about the stock market, or Tell me stories about your childhood. Like, you just have to change the communication style a little bit. And sure, does it require a little bit more effort on your part? And maybe sometimes when you're parentified, you have resistance in your head. Like, maybe you shouldn't be the one trying all the time. Like, sure, your brain can kind of go into those places. But at the end of the day, what we're working towards with family constellation therapy is peace, order, and love in the family system. And you have to be that embodiment of that first and foremost for it to ripple out into the family system energetically and epigenetically. Because when you're doing this work, just like any other healing work you're doing, you're shifting the epigenetic expression so that future generations don't fall into that same hole that you were in.
Right. I love that concept, especially as a mother, to know that you can stop the genetics, the epigenetics, the trauma, whatever you want to call it, the vibration from your past, from passing it down to your children at any point during your life.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's like the greatest gift a mother can give, I think.
Right.
That and their love and their presence.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So talking about our relationships with our mothers, but this obviously can be any parent, but talk a little bit about enmeshment. I know you talk about enmeshment a lot. So what does that look like in a family?
So to continue the conversation on belonging and searching for connection, enmeshment is one of those things that can become a language of the family system. And enmeshment is this idea that, there's interdependence in relationships of all kind, right? There's, I know who I am, you know who you are. I like to look at it in terms of a Venn diagram. I've got one foot in me, you've got one foot in you, and then we share this relationship of feet in the middle where we're able to have this connection. And so when you've got two people in that middle circle and they don't have any sense of self or their own identity, then oftentimes you find trauma bonding, relationships that are too close, that mimic each other too closely, even sharing energy, being able to, you're almost going into someone else's energy field and not being able to be sovereign in your own. That could be your spiritual energy, your emotional energy, physical, whatever it is. So enmeshment is just when two things are too close to each other. And that happens a lot with loss energy, survival energy in the family. When there's like big T traumas, like, let's just say let's just say mom had complications at birth, baby had to go to the NICU. They spent time apart from each other. When they come back together, there's this sense of, oh my God, we were separated from each other. Now there's this need to be close. Mom oftentimes can become fearful that baby will leave again. So there's this like deep enmeshment that could be created with the parent. Most of the time it's created with the parent. We put a lot of emphasis on the parents in FCT because the parents are ultimately responsible for a lot of how a child develops and behaves and kind of it moves throughout the world and their belief with themselves.
Right. And the parent for the first, let's say 5 to 7 years of life is the child's everything, right? That's who teaches them, that who feeds them, gives them nourishment, and who the child looks up to. So that the parent is basically God to a child.
Yeah. And also, I tell parents all the time, like, if we can shift your perspective of I messed up or I'm not a good parent because I did this. I'm not a parent. So I'm speaking purely from a facilitator perspective. I know that I would kind of be the parent who would beat myself up because I expect myself to.
Yeah, I'm that parent.
Yeah. Here's the thing. We do the best we can with the tools we have in the circumstances that we're in. And I had to drill that into my head with my parents. My mom was an only child who had 5 kids, very like American household, like every person had 1 potato per person, like very just like quiet. My dad, Middle Eastern, Lebanese, loud personality, 5 kids, everyone, God bless them for like their marriage. They're not together anymore, but it's probably for the best. But like they probably were going through it and had 5 kids and like didn't have the capacity to be a present parent. It sucked. I'm an adult now. I can choose to do my healing now and find empowerment in that. And that's why I like the idea of black sheep to cycle breaker.
Yeah.
Because it's that really empowering thing. But to go back to enmeshment, just to finish that up, the idea is that many times enmeshment can happen often with mothers is when I see it the most. And it's, again, that sense of fear or loss or survival that, or separation. It can happen with adoption. That's intuitively coming through. Maybe, I don't know, somebody needs to hear that, but adoption keeps coming in. So yeah, and it's just in the most compassionate way to look at enmeshment. It is our deep primal desire to have connection and not having the tools to know how to do it in a healthy way for ourselves and for others. So we think we're being connected by being enmeshed, but we're actually just inhibiting ourselves as the client or as the parent from either allowing the child to be in their own sense of self and have their own interdependence, or giving ourselves that with our parents. So that's the kind of loving way I like to look at it, because again, I'm the kind of person that would beat myself up in a heartbeat.
Right. I am that person. And after my oldest child is 7, and I feel like it took 7 years, but I've gotten to the point where I've always knew this mentally, but internalized the fact that everyone's supposed to go through their challenges, right? We try our best to be perfect, whatever perfect is, but everyone's meant to struggle in one way or another. And like you did, and like I did, turn your greatest struggle into your greatest gift, right? So in a way, our child's struggles will be their gifts eventually also.
I love that perspective. And I'm not even sure how I feel that our souls sign up for traumatic things. I think a lot of those things are human nature, but I do believe, and from what I know from my guides, that we do choose our parents and our families because they serve a greater purpose for us. And it's so funny. Who was I just listening to? I was listening to a podcast the other day. I don't remember who it was. I listened to so many. And this woman was describing Heidi Powell. She was on the Skinny Confidential. And she was talking about how her family, she has such a deep love and admiration for them. And yet they are the reason she is who she is today. And it just made me think, our families are always in service to us, for better or for worse. They always are. But we get to this point in our lives where, for me, like, I was 28 and I had been pointing the finger a lot at my family growing up. It's all your fault and you did that. And it was keeping me stuck. Eventually I had to grow the F up and be like, yeah, honestly, my childhood was horrible. I'm going to spend the next 5 years grieving how horrible it was. And I still do. And horrible in some ways,
sure,
beautiful in other ways. But I allowed myself to feel that grief, to actually feel it, not to analyze it and not to conceptualize it, but to actually feel it. And then it was the empowerment that came from that of like, oh, okay. So like, I really am as powerful as I feel I could be in being able to heal this stuff. And that's where the whole black sheep to cycle breaker thing was born, because I lived it through myself. And I'm not saying that in an egoic way or an egotistical way, but there is something to be said for, I'm even like nervous saying it out loud now, the fear of talking about the things your family doesn't want to talk about. And my voice is like going down. Like I like somatically do not want to say it out loud, because it's this fear that I don't want to put myself above anybody or whatever it is. But it's like, if you can have the courage, like I heard this thing growing up where my dad used to say, we don't air our dirty laundry outside the family. And I get that. Like, I'm not going to go air, but at the same time, nobody was talking about that dirty laundry. I would have appreciated knowing the truth as a child of what was really going on, and then talking about it and getting support. And it was when I started looking underneath that dirty laundry and kind of moving through the hamper that I was like, whoa, this happened. Holy shit, this happened. Like, and everyone has been hiding it and no one's been talking about this. No wonder I feel so depressed. No wonder I feel so this deep need for validation, this deep need for people to just be direct and tell me the truth. Because as a child, I could feel something wasn't right in my environment. I don't even know how I got off on a tangent about that, but
Yeah, we can only hide our dirty laundry for so long until it gets overflowed and you gotta do your laundry.
Yes. Yeah. Ancestral laundry.
Talking about cycle breakers, I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but what do you think makes a cycle breaker? Because I think a lot of people in our generation specifically are cycle breakers. And I don't know if that's generationally the energy or if it's something in a person.
Spirits made it really clear to me that there are certain generations that are meant to break certain cycles, and every generation will break a cycle of some kind. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know what cycle I'm supposed to, you are going to break a cycle of some kind. There's a lot of people out there with schools of thought that millennials are breaking the physical abuse cycle. It could be true for some people, could not be true, but on a mass scale, that's what some people believe. It's curious to think about it. But I do think that millennials, I'm a millennial, I'm 33, and I do believe that we were raised in such a technologically advanced generation that there's a lot of cycles that we are almost being pulled into breaking, not even consciously doing it, but it's almost happening in the world around us. But I think a cycle breaker, at the end of the day, is somebody who internally feels that something is off in their world, that they're not experiencing all of the joy or the love or the truth that they want to be experiencing. And they believe that there is a possibility that they could shift that narrative. And when they find the ancestral piece of who they are, being able to look at the truth and being able to be heart-centered and say, maybe this happened before, but it stops with me, and I'm going to rewrite a new story. So I think that's what I would define as a cycle breaker, honestly. And I think so I used to think I was a black sheep. Like, I used to tell people I was a black sheep. Yeah. I have a sister who says she's a black sheep too. And then I know quite a few people who have openly said to me, yeah, I'm the black sheep, and they're close in my life. And
I also know people who would have been the black sheep if they felt comfortable being one, right? If they felt comfortable breaking away from that enmeshment and doing something different from the family, but instead they've decided not to because it doesn't feel comfortable.
1,000,000%. I think black sheep show up differently for everybody and like how it shows up with them in regards to their family system. But when I see somebody who's a black sheep, I almost just want to like put my hands on their shoulders and just kind of go, you feel like a black sheep because you are different. And you're meant to do it different. And if you shift that perspective, because I think black sheep sometimes has a negative connotation.
Right.
And that makes me sad, because what I really want to say is you may perceive your difference from your family as something negative, but actually, what if you've just been identifying connection with your family around this one thing that no longer serves you for your entire life? And that calling to like shift out of it, to do it differently, is actually your calling to evolve and grow and rise up and shift the family story. And then if you still desire connection with your family, doing it differently, changing the conversations you're having with your family, like whatever it is that helps people shift into this place of empowerment. And sometimes it's estrangement, sometimes it's not, just kind of depends on the person. But yeah, I think that anyone who's listening and thinks that they're a black sheep, like you said, what if you just lean into it and own it? Like maybe you are meant to let something die in the family system, and maybe you're supposed to birth something completely different. And then you might find connections actually a lot easier than you thought, because you're not doing it in a way that doesn't align for you.
Right. And maybe you're not a black sheep. Maybe you're a golden unicorn.
Love that. I love unicorns.
Exactly. Who doesn't love unicorns?
Totally.
So we talk about changing the conversation in our family, right? And I feel like in a lot of ways that's easier said than done. So how can we still find connection with our family without reliving the past traumas and the past ways that things have been done?
The first thing that comes to mind is that relationships are a two-way street. All relationships, family most importantly. Meaning, if you want to find a different way to connect with your family and they're not willing to meet you halfway, that might be a relationship that requires a little bit more space than connection. And then that's what happens in the human experience, Spirit says. People have free will and choice. They either choose to meet you halfway and want to grow and evolve with you, or they don't. Some people fit a certain chapter of your life. Some people are there for you for the whole thing. just kind of, people are there for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I think that for me, and I'm going to only speak for myself on this because I'm still moving through this. How do I connect with my family in a way that feels good for me, that doesn't go against my values and all these new things that I'm learning about myself? And it is, what I've learned in my experience is to have short but powerful moments with them rather than these long drawn out moments where you're kind of you keep kind of searching. Yeah, I just want to be more mindful as I respond to this, because this is really something I'm deeply moving through myself right now. Again, it's like if the family language is we all worry about how many steps we get in and what we're eating today, and are we eating protein and carb? Are we going to obsess about what we're eating? Like if that's the way that everyone's finding connection and that doesn't feel good for you. For me, sometimes it's just about staying quiet and then waiting for that conversation to pass and then saying, so-and-so, like, tell me about your photography. Like, how's your photography going? Just kind of like not, again, enmeshing yourself just to find that connection,
I think like in that instance, though, depending on where you're coming from, it's also okay to create boundaries, right? Like if you're a person with an eating disorder, those conversations are not going to support you or help you. Or like in my case, I have kids. I don't allow certain things about food to be said around my kids. Like it's a boundary I'm not going to cross.
I love that you brought up boundaries because that is something we talk a lot about in FCT as well. And a lot of people get boundaries and walls confused. Sometimes estrangement is needed. And I have clients who are estranged from their families for very good reasons. Oftentimes, it is about making sure that we feel we can be in right relationship with other people, that it's a two-way street, and that even if they can't always honor our boundaries, because we have to leave room for our own desires if we still want to be in communication with them or not, just honoring that we can protect ourselves, that we can protect our boundaries, and knowing that as long as we're clear about our emotional experience around certain people, we can better navigate the relationships around us too.
Yeah, I love that. What do you say to people who have estrangement with a family member, but they still feel that pain from it, essentially? They're still suffering that trauma of disconnection. Let's say it's a mother, father, someone really close in the family, where it's their choice to be estranged, but in a lot of ways it's not, because it's something that had to be done.
Grief is one of the most complicated emotions I think I've ever experienced, worked through in my career and in my personal life. It is complicated. There are so many things that come up in terms of grief of even grieving people who are still alive, right? Who we are estranged with, that we don't feel safe to be in communication with or have connection with. So, can you repeat your question again? I want to make sure I really answer it right.
Because what would you say to support people who are estranged from close family members for safety, for emotional, physical safety, but they still feel that sense of connection and that sense of loss from the lack of connection?
I truly have this belief after 3 years of doing FCT, and then also for the years I've been doing it for me as a student of the work, that we all deep down have this, even if it's the size of a mustard seed, this desire to love and be loved by our families, regardless of how horrible they were to us. And that is sometimes what keeps us in that feeling of, well, maybe I should reach out, or maybe I should send that text, or maybe I should do something to try to fix this relationship, because we're tribal beings. Also, we are, like, on a spiritual sense, we are love. When we are at our highest vibration, we are love. And so love can't comprehend that feeling of that disconnection in that humanness. Right. So my advice would be that if you feel that you have to be estranged from your families, honor that desire and honor your safety and protecting yourself first and foremost. However, my advice would always be that you can come to a place of acceptance and love for your family, even when you're not in relationship with them. And it takes time and it takes work and it takes a good support team and an open mind and an open heart. But you deserve to be free of the things that other people did to you because they could not uphold your relationship in love. And so if it's something that is continuing to weigh you down, you can and you will, with time and work, get to a place where you can let alone just accept who they are and understand who they are, and then find freedom from the things that they did to you that made you believe that you were unlovable, unworthy, like whatever it is, without having to be in a relationship with them. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I will never forget. I had a client who has given me permission to share this, because I've shared it before, had a horribly abusive father. And she came to me and said, I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive him or love him, but I know that I need healing. And by the end of our 2 hours together, she was sobbing on her paper, talking to her dad. And I said at the end, is there anything that you want to say to him? And she just sobbed and said, I love you. Because we love our families. We love that. They gave us life. So yes, acknowledge that, but then take the space that you need if their humanness is not safe for you.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I got full body chills talking about it because it just, anytime I think about it, I'm just like, the things that this woman went through, for her 2 hours later to say, I love you. It's just, It humbles you, really.
Yeah. And that just shows us that change is possible and that we don't need to live with these things or these feelings forever.
Perfectly said.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about ancestral trauma and how that shows up in our lives, but you work a lot with past life trauma also, correct?
Yes.
So can you talk about that a little bit? Because I feel like, I don't know, at least for myself, a lot of the times that can be harder to let go of because there's no conscious picture or memory of it.
Unless you do a past life regression therapy session with hypnosis, it can be really hard to connect with that. And this is where, like, I don't lead with that. I want to say first and foremost, like, as a facilitator, yes, I can do intuition and mediumship, and we can look at past lives. And I think it's a really fun part of who we are as human beings. But I have to have one foot in the physical trauma information just as much as I have a foot in the spiritual world, and to stay super balanced in that. But past life trauma really is something that, it's interesting. Spirit shows it to me as like soulic DNA, and then we have human DNA. And the soul DNA of our past lives, it plays a role in how we choose the human self that we come into in order to keep evolving and growing. Because isn't that kind of just the point? I mean, we just keep reincarnating and we keep coming in with the same people, and we keep finding these same lessons, and we keep going through the same thing. So we have life experience to help us be in the experience to grow and evolve, plus many other things that we get to experience as human beings that you don't get to experience on the other side. So that's what I would say is that past life trauma is very real. It could be with people that are in your life today. It could be with people that you haven't met yet. It could be with places. I mean, fascinating thing we do with FCT, not only in past life, but in current life, is, the mother country. Part of the mother wound is if there's immigration trauma, like my family, I've had to put Lebanon as a piece of paper many, many times, because the war and the trauma and the abuse that happened there still energetically and emotionally came into me through my family, through my lineage. So reconnecting with certain parts of yourself, current life, but also past life, can be really healing for you. I mean, spirit is so interesting. I speak to spirit quite a bit, so I keep bringing them up. But you know, I was called to move to Colorado from California. Had no clue why, just kept feeling the call to go there. And a few months ago, I told them, I said, I don't know why you told me to come here, because I don't feel like I'm getting anything positive from being here. It's actually been really difficult. And I said, I think I'm going to move back to San Diego. And they had a one sentence for me that I now use for so many things. Where you are, your soul, where it's been and where you are, the energy of where you are only brings to light certain parts of you that are activated by that place. So you can find past life healing. If you had a past life in Germany and you go to Germany, you can find healing just by going back to Germany and being in that country, because there's things that are going to be brought up in you solically from being in the energy of that country. I know it's kind of all over the place, but I mean, that's the beauty of past life healing, is that you can, I mean, let's just say you go to Mexico and you have this deep like calling, like you just love the culture and you have no Hispanic heritage in you whatsoever, or Latin heritage, but you know that you just love that place. Well, you could have had a past life there. And, I mean, with FCT, I've put past lives in before. They seem to be supportive for the client, but not as impactful as the current life stuff.
Yeah. And I guess in some sense, our past life stuff is going to mimic our current life stuff as we cycle through the same dharma and the same purposes and trying to find out the same answers.
Well, the past life DNA is a part of our DNA today. Right. That's why they call it solic DNA. So yeah, that part is living within you on some level, but we don't always have to go into the past life to heal it. Many times, like I've put my endometriosis in the field before, and the woman that I work with said, I think you have a past life, something around losing like a baby or whatever. And so she put that past life in, and, there's healing of my endometriosis today. And then that past life just kind of heals along with it.
Right. Right.
It's all quantum. There's no real time on the other side. So everything's kind of quantum healing at the same time. We don't have, sometimes we don't have to be so focused on the past life stuff.
Good point. Yes.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about trauma in the present sense, in terms of ancestral trauma, how many generations do you feel like it goes back? I've heard in epigenetics, it goes back 2 generations because we were in our mother's womb, who was in our grandmother's womb. But I feel like it could go back farther. So I'm curious your opinion on that.
I've heard anything. Well, my mentor used to say that epigenetics can heal back to 14 generations behind you and 14 generations in front of you. I believe I've heard 7 before. I've heard the 2 with women. I don't know. I think, again, this is just my own view of it. When we're in the energy field during an FCT, when we're doing any kind of like quantum, even inner child work, this is all like quantum, like time doesn't exist in this healing. I mean, you could be healing for something that your conscious great grandma has, but great grandma could be connected to 6 generations before her when that grandma had something and you don't even know about it. So 14, 20, like who knows, but like epigenetically, it's been said anywhere between 7 to 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, that you are taking on the trauma that someone else is holding from someone else. So it could be 100.
I mean, like the likelihood is low, but again, I learned very early on in my career, and I was very humbled that as soon as I think I know something, I don't. So I try to keep a very curious eye on everything that I do, because there's always something new to learn.
Right. Yeah. I know from personal experience, and you've mentioned it over this past hour, that you channel, that you use your mediumship during your sessions. Yeah. So I'm curious, is that part of FCT in general, or is that like your secret sauce? And when did that start for you?
I love that question. No one's asked me that before. So Bert Hellinger, the man that started and modernized rather FCT from the Zulu tribes in Africa, he called it what did he call it? Like a phenomenology or something like that. I can't remember the exact word. It's this idea that there's a larger, a bigger energy out there that guides us in the field, right? And you kind of set the intention to open it. That's my understanding of how Bert teaches it, and now his wife, because he's passed a few years ago. The way that I learned it is the woman that I learned it from in LA. She is also an intuitive and a medium and wildly psychic and just so gifted. And so she coached me during those first 6 months of our FCT time together to speak to spirit. And she encouraged me to own this gift that I shut off as a child. And so while I would say traditionally in FCT, probably not, they're also very open to the idea of intuition and psychic abilities and mediumship. it is kind of my secret sauce with FCT a little bit, because I think that I got trained by this woman named Nikki Novo on intuition, and there was some ancestral stuff in there, and there was a lot of chakras. Like it was like how to learn everything. And I took what I liked, and I kind of poo-pooed the rest, because, it's a muscle. Everyone's intuitive. Everyone builds intuition over time if they practice it enough. But the mediumship was not something that I was per se trained in by Nikki Novo or anyone else. People's loved ones started coming to me in the middle of a session. And one of the very first FCTs I ever did was with my OG client. We were in our first session together, and I'm offering it for free because she's my first one. I'm like, anyone, if you've never tried it before, I'll give it to you for free. I just need to practice. And all of a sudden, I felt this younger guy in his 30s in a military outfit with camo on, and he was standing like this behind me against my door. And I got full body chills up my spine. And I was like, there's literally, and of course I knew what mediumship was, but I said to her, a man in an army, like a suit, does that resonate? She goes, oh yeah, that's my unofficial brother. He died when he was, and I was like, oh, okay. So these people are coming to visit me during my sessions. And some people are just there to check out what they're doing. Some people come through and they want a specific message to come through, or they just want to say hi, or they're concerned about something. So the mediumship is something I've honestly learned on my own, because no one ever taught me how to do this. If anyone taught me how, it's all these people's ancestors who have been coming to me, and I'm like, wait a second, what are you saying to me? You want them to check behind the couch for the cow toy? What are you talking? And they're like, oh my God, my toy from childhood. And I'm like, oh, I can do this. So it was kind of self-taught. I'm actually, after the last 3.5 years, I'm finally taking a mediumship course in January, because the more I use it, the more complicated and complex the things are being shown to me, and I need to have a better understanding of it. But I love speaking to people's loved ones who crossed over. Obviously, I haven't been able to shut up about it, but I love it because it's so cool.
No, and I think that's a cool aspect of your work. And I do think it adds something, having some extra insight that's not from this realm, right? Knowing what's going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Initiation by getting thrown into the fire, for sure.
Right. You said you shut it off though when you were a kid. When did you first notice it?
I think I've always been very sensitive and a deep feeler. So I'm very empathetic. I'm a highly sensitive person. And it's something I'm working on. But consciously, I want to say it was around between 8 and 10 years old that I would walk down the hallway. We had this really long house. It wasn't a box house. It was just spread out really long. And there was the kitchen was over here and my bedroom was over here. And in the middle of the night, I'd have insomnia and I would wake up and go to the kitchen and get something to eat. And I'd be walking back to my room, pitch dark, afraid of the dark. And how some people say oh, I could feel someone walking behind me. I believe that was me. And I believe that it was my guides, my guides and my angels who were there to protect me as a child and keep me safe. And I used to have this deep devotion. I still do, but as a child, to Mother Mary, an unexplainable, deep devotion to praying to her, asking for her help, asking for her guidance, asking for her love, and just praying to her. And so I think that I had this idea that there were other beings out there and I could feel them, but it wasn't until 2020 when I started awakening this stuff. And one of my guides came in to talk to me and said, I was the one walking behind you in the middle of the night. I was the one protecting you. And then he showed me his name. And after that, it was I've never been alone. I just had to shut it off because I was the kind of kid that would walk into a room and go, why is everyone mad? And no one would be talking to each other. And then everyone would be mad at me that I would say something and no one would ever sit me down. So I just started to stop trusting myself and completely shut it off from 12 until 28. So
Did you have insomnia a lot as a kid or just that one time?
No, a lot. I would wake up a lot.
Same.
Yeah. Did you too?
Yeah, that's why I was curious. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was bad. I used to have like panic attacks in the middle of the night too.
Yeah.
I still to this day, it could be a million reasons. Did you ever figure out why you had it?
Not as a kid. I mean, as an adult, yes, but not as a kid.
Yeah. I don't know. Couldn't tell you.
All right. Well, thank you, Kat. I think this has been an amazing conversation. Any last things you want to talk about?
Yeah, actually. Yeah. Do you mind if I do a little plug?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Tell us where to find you, how to do your sessions, your podcast, all of it.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about cycle breakers today, actually, like quite a bit. And if anyone is like wondering how they can figure out their role in their family system and kind of their family dynamics and where they fit in, and even like how they want to embrace being the cycle breaker, I have this free quiz on my website. It's called the Cycle Breaker Archetype Quiz. And I basically have narrowed down like 5 different roles: the hyper independent, the rebel, the parentified child, the caregiver, and the comedian, and how we learned how to cope in our family systems and the role that we play. And we talk about, what it's like to feel like the black sheep in those roles, how to transform them into being a cycle breaker. I send you like a free podcast episode that we deep dive into your archetype. I send you a spirit animal. I give you like all the things, but that might be supportive for anyone who's listening that might feel like that cycle breaker thing really stuck with them. Other than that, my website is katdaou.com. I'm sure you'll link it somewhere. My Instagram is Kat Daou. TikTok is Heal with Kat Pod. I have my own podcast that I do. So yeah, pretty much the basic socials.
Amazing. And we'll link all of Kat's information in the show notes so anyone can link up with her if they want to.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Kat. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.